Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Last week I posted a poll on my Twitter page just asking what people wanted to see from my next Dungeons & Dragons oriented video. As you can probably tell by looking at the background here, the winner of that was Curse of Strahd, which is the latest adventure to be released by Wizards of the Coast. Curse of Strahd is an adventure designed for characters levels 1 through 10. And it is essentially a retelling of the very original Ravenloft adventure that came out for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. Now, this video is not going to be the full review, simply because I've only had this book for a few weeks now, and during that time I've worked at least one day out of each weekend, or last weekend was taken up with, visits with family, so I haven't had a chance to really sit down and read this as of yet. I've only had a chance to kind of do sort of a quick flip through. But this video will be a first impressions at least. I've done first impression videos for the other adventures that have been released so far, so I'm going to keep in that tradition. This is sort of just going to be a quick video here with the full review to come in a week's time when I've had more of a chance to sit down and read it. And in that video I plan on doing sort of a detailed breakdown of the different chapters, as well as give like my full thoughts on it. So anything that I say right now is based off of more of a cursory flip through, and very little time dedicated to actually reading the adventure. Now, the things that I do know is that the Curse of Strahd is, again, it's a retelling of the original Ravenloft, and it even states that in a sidebar in the book here. So it's not a wholly original adventure. It's taking the original Ravenloft and sort of updating it for the modern days. The main designer for this adventure was Christopher Perkins, who's an absolutely fantastic DM. If you ever watch any of the Acquisitions Incorporated stuff, he does an absolutely fantastic job. And they worked very closely with the original designers of Ravenloft, so with Tracy and Laura Hickman. And, they even kind of signed off on it, and they did a little foreword for it, and they were heavily involved in the process. So it kind of takes the original Ravenloft adventure, retells that in full, but also expands on some of the lore. For the surrounding areas like Barovia and things like that. One thing I will say is the artwork in this book is absolutely gorgeous so far. Absolutely loving it. It's got a lot of great stuff in here. I particularly enjoy the full page art pieces. There's not a whole lot of them, but when they do have them, they are absolutely astonishing. For those who've never played through it, Ravenloft, the original Ravenloft, was sort of like a gothic horror adventure, which, unlike a lot of the adventures at the time, focused very heavily on not only just the story, but the actual antagonist. So it really fleshed out the villain, and had it more than just being, some big, burly monster at the end of the dungeon. And a lot of, adventures that have been published since then, kind of followed suit and tried to make more dynamic and interesting villains. In this adventure, the main antagonist is, of course, Strahd, one of the original vampires in the Dungeons & Dragons universe, probably the most famous vampire in all of Dungeons & Dragons. His motivations in this are pretty similar to the previous versions, where he's basically attempting to turn a woman by the name of Irina Kolyana, who bears a very strong physical resemblance to his former wife or lover, whatever the two of them were at the time. So she looks exactly like Strahd's lost love, and he's trying to turn her into a vampire. The way to do that is, he has to feed on her or drink her blood 3 nights in a row. And usually by the time the players get to that area or get into the adventure, he's already drank her blood twice. So, looks like he's only one away from doing that. In this version, he's also looking to find Rudolf van Richten, who is a very famous vampire hunter in the Dungeons & Dragons game. So again, he's a very well-known character. So it brings in some of the Ravenloft campaign setting lore that was established in the second edition setting when it came out. Similar to the original adventure, as well as the 3.5 update, which came out a few years back, the campaign involves some random elements. So if you have different groups playing through the same adventure, they may have different paths that they've taken to get through it. In all three of the versions that I have here in front of me, one of the major elements is this fortune telling, which determines different aspects of the adventure. The fortune telling can take place with they're called Taroka cards, or playing cards. If you had the Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, it used the 3-Dragon anti-deck. And this one here does have some game aids at the back, including, I believe, let me just see if I can find them, including some of the cards. So if you wanted to use these cards here, you can scan them, print them off, cut them out, and I believe, I want to say Gale Force 9 are the ones that do the game aids for Dungeons & Dragons. I believe they have a physical set of these cards that you can purchase. The card reading determines things where you can find certain relics or artifacts, like Strahd's journal, the icon of Ravenkind, which is like, I guess, a religious symbol, and the Sun Sword, which is a weapon that can be used to defeat Strahd. In this version, it also has an ally, so the reading can determine who you can team up with, so what major NPC in this book can help you defeat Strahd, and finally where you can basically find Strahd in his castle for the final confrontation. So again, if you have two groups playing through the same adventure, they probably have different fortune tellings, so the results are going to be different for each group, which is kind of cool, and it means that different players from different groups can tell their stories, and it's not going to all be the same like a lot of other pre-written campaigns really are. Now that said, the campaign does feel very much like the original Ravenloft, but again, it also feels a lot like the 3.5 update Expedition to Castle Ravenloft. Now again, this is just at a quick cursory glance, so there may be some major differences that I just haven't come across yet, but it does feel like it is very similar to that 3.5 version of the adventure. So if anybody's played through the 3.5 Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, I'm not sure enough time has really passed between then and now for this to feel like a whole new thing. And if you played through both the original and the 3.5 version, I'm not sure how much you're going to actually get out of this that's new. Now again, I'll look into it in a lot more detail, and hopefully I'll have some big differences between the two. Now I know the inclusion of Rudolf van Richten is unique to the 5th edition version. I don't believe he was ever mentioned in the 3.5 version, and I don't think he existed in the original Ravenloft. So again, I'll kind of flip through and have a look and see how accurate that statement is. So if I'm wrong, please go easy on me in the comments, because it's been a while since I've read those other adventures, and I just haven't had the time with this one. Some of the things that I like about this, it does bring back the isometric maps, which were part of the original version. So instead of just having sort of a standard, head-on or bird's-eye view of a dungeon, it gives you sort of this more angled look. Gives it more, I guess, of a sense of a three-dimensional space, which is really cool. And again, it was sort of the way the maps were done in the original version. Other than that, it looks like it has some stuff that takes place, outside of the castle itself. There's some, role-playing scenarios, and actually that's one of the things that I really kind of want to touch on. Again, I haven't gone all the way through the book yet, but from what I can tell, this is a very role-playing oriented adventure. I believe it makes heavy use of the milestone experience system, where when the player characters achieve a certain point in the story, that's when they gain a level, instead of focusing more on earning experience through combat. So if you're a new DM and you haven't had a lot of experience with with role-playing heavy adventures, this may be a little bit daunting. So if you do end up picking this up, I recommend reading through the full thing and having a pretty decent knowledge of the book itself before you start the campaign. There definitely seems to be a lot, again, where I say of role-playing scenarios, because this book is only designed for characters levels 1 through 10. All the other campaigns have gone up to 15th level, and this has pretty much the same page count, if not maybe even a little bit more than some of the other campaigns. So that's a lot of pages, a lot of information, and again, it's not like a huge dungeon crawl with, encounter after encounter. So you have to be comfortable with role-playing. I'd recommend having a group that's comfortable with role-playing. Beyond that, one of the things that I really enjoy about this, and one of the things that almost automatically makes this my favorite adventure release so far, is that it includes something that I have been waiting for since the starter set came out. And that is to have a adventure or product released that includes a fold-out, tear-out map. Now, I haven't removed this from the book yet. It's one of the ones that comes with like the perforations that you have to rip out, and I've had very little luck ripping product or maps out of books, I should say. So I'm gonna, wait until I have the time. I'm gonna take my time and hope that I'm not gonna tear the maps itself. But you know what? They're here. I finally have an adventure that has maps that I can pull out and reference, and that makes a huge difference in my books. It also has a lot of really useful role-playing aids in the form of like journal excerpts, handouts that you can give to the players that they can read through. The one thing I will say is you can probably have a look here. You need to know how to read cursive to kind of get through this. So if you're not good with that, hopefully there'll be some online resources, or hopefully they may even have it written out in just regular typing, what it says. Because I know that cursive is something that doesn't really get used a lot in modern day. And I know a lot of the school systems are actually, almost completely eliminating it from their curriculum. So again, know how to read cursive in order to use these, and if not, hopefully there's an online resource for you, or the notes are reproduced. It also includes the cards here themselves, so if you wanted to use the fortune telling with the actual cards that the player characters would see, they have them here, so you can scan them, you can print them out. And again, I think Gale Force 9 has a physical set that you can purchase. The one thing that I'm not a huge fan of, considering how fantastic the artwork is throughout the book, the artwork on these cards are absolutely fantastic, but it's all black and white, which is visually just not the most interesting thing in the world. I really would have liked to have seen some introduction of color. I know that this is more of a gothic adventure, so the black and white does set the tone, but you could have had some red thrown in there as well. Red, black, and white would make it very stylized looking, and would still fit the overall theme of the campaign. So that said, again, I'm going to have to go through and fully read the campaign to have more of an idea, just how much I either like this or maybe even could potentially be let down. I don't think I'm going to be disappointed with this. Everything looks really fantastically done and written to date that I've gone through and read, but again, time will tell. I'm going to have, like I said, a more comprehensive review. So as far as first impressions go, I'm happy that I finally got this book. It did take me a while to get, just because I didn't really have the funds, and the online price for the longest time was basically full retail, which I just didn't have at the time. So I ended up waiting almost a month, I think, before I finally came down to the point where I could afford to pick it up. But I'm glad that I did. I also think it's kind of a cool nod to the Castlevania series of video games as well, the artwork on the cover here. So for those who aren't overly familiar, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest has elements on their cover art taken from this image here. So the video game cover had like Simon Belmont kind of in the front here with his whip, but in the background was a vampire standing on a balcony with a very similar pose to this. Now, it wasn't the exact same picture, obviously for legal purposes, but it was very heavily inspired by that. So looking at this here, the first thing that comes to my mind is Castlevania Symphony of the Night, with Dracula at the very beginning there, sitting on his throne with his glass of wine. So probably asking, what is a man, and then throwing it in dramatic fashion. So I think that's pretty cool. So far, this does look like a really cool adventure. I've never actually run the Ravenloft Adventures before, so this is new territory for me, and I'm hoping that, one of these days I'll get a chance to run this adventure. That said, be sure to come back next week when I've had more of a chance to read it, and I will have a more comprehensive review, again, including sort of a breakdown of what the different chapters have. the overall story progression of the campaign, as well as my final thoughts and my final recommendations. So again, thank you very much for those who took the time to respond to the poll that I had on Twitter. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it kind of tides you over until I get a chance to look into this a little more in depth. And I do hope that you come back next week for my full review. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.